Hello and welcome back. Spring and summer is a time for new growth and taking bold action together. So we hope these stories will inspire you to live boldly, take wise chances, and with our friends and family make a difference together. Today we will be reading Old Tales Retold, or Perils and Adventures of Tennessee Pioneers by Octavia Zollicoffer Bond. And it's an old one. It's a precious one, so I'm going to try as hard as I can to be gentle with it. So lean in with the spirit of adventure, grab a friend, and let's enjoy the story together. The Voyage of the Adventure. It's our kind of book. Bold's kind of book. After a while, the people of Watauga, tired of strife, began to talk of a country still farther west, where it was thought there would be no trouble with Indians. Hunters who visited it spoke highly of a region surrounding a fine salt sulfur spring called the French Salt Lick near the Bluffs, on the lower Cumberland, where they had formerly been a French trading post. They described the immediate vicinity of the spring as an opening surrounded by grand timber. Tine opening, they said, was covered with luxuriant grass and cane and was frequented by buffalo and other game, which came to lick the salt deposit around the spring. That'd be so weird. You're just looking out your window and there's like buffalo licking the walls. That'd be weird. Anyway. And frequented by buffalo and other game, which came to lick the salt deposit around the spring. So great, they declared, were their numbers that the bellows of buffalo fell upon their ears before they came in view, like the roar of a cataract or the lumberings of a thunderstorm. Now, granted, there were a lot of buffalo, but they were overhunted, and but you can see them in Yellowstone from a safe distance. But yeah, they overdid it, and they weren't. You read these old stories, and they talk about how plentiful they were. I mean, how, like in the last chapter, that it was just a sea of brown, and then, yeah, that's why it's important to, not do that. Don't go overboard, because then there's not enough babies to, anyway. It's sad. Let's see, the hunters also reported that the country was entirely free from Indians. There were, they said, no wigwams within hundreds of miles in any direction, and the vast hunting grounds lying between the Ohio and the Cumberland rivers had lately been peaceably purchased from the Cherokees. Colonel Henderson, the treaty maker, had bought it with the aid of Daniel Boone in a treaty with the Indians at Sycamore Shoals, or Watauga, paying for the whole purchase $50,000 in blankets and trinkets. Colonel Henderson was now ready to sell portions of the land to any persons who applied. There were many who were anxious to go to a spot which was distant from all sides from Indians. This was the chief object of the earliest immigrants to the Cumberland country, moving farther into the wilderness. Peace, not war, was the desire of their hearts. This was the spirit in which the settlement at the French Salt Lick, where Nashville was later built, was first begun. Oh, hilarious. Nashville, home of country singers and cowboy boots and, women about to get married. And it started as a place where, buffaloes were licking walls. I love it. So fancy. Among those who caught the Western fever were Colonel John Donaldson, a noted frontier surveyor, and James Robertson, the head man of Watauga. A plan was set on foot by them to move with their own families and others to the new country. There were two ways by which to get there. One was to go 500 miles overland through the dangerous ground of Kentucky. The other way was to take boat on the Holston, follow the current of that river, and up the Tennessee River, into which it flows to the Ohio, then up to the mouth of the Cumberland and proceed up that stream to the Big Salt Lick, making a course of 2,000 miles by water. Okay, so Nashville is kind of smack dab into Tennessee, right? Tennessee is really long. So Nashville is a little kitty corner, a little more northeast. Kentucky is above Tennessee, above us. And so they're talking about going, oh, goodness gracious. Wow. Hi. We've never done this before. Hi, Annie. Okay, wow. Oh, thank you, honey. Let's see, and then Virginia. I mean, we're talking about a very long way. Thankfully, Nashville, Salt Lake area, is more north than Knoxville or Memphis, but still. Finally, it was agreed that James Robinson should go in advance by way of Kentucky, taking with him his good friends George Freeland, William Neely, Edward Swanson, James Handley, and William Overall to keep an eye on him. Make sure it doesn't get... You know how much they ribbed him about that, after he was okay. They have to go and keep an eye on him. Who were men of tried faithfulness and courage. The rest of the men, with all the women and children, were to follow by water, with Donaldson on a fleet of 30 or more boats of various shapes and sizes, led by the good boat Adventure. Well, that's aptly named. Robertson's wife, Charlotte Reeves Robinson, with her 5 children, as well as... We think taking kids on a plane is bad. Can you imagine these journeys that they used to go on with their whole families? It's just crazy. Let's see. The families of Donaldson and others were on board the flagship Adventure, which carried a sail. The fleet of houseboats, flatboats, dugouts, and canoes left Fort Patrick Henry on the Holston on the 22nd day of December. Ooh, that's going to make it cold. 22nd day of December in 1779, bound for the lower Cumberland. I wonder why they left so late this season. It would be a mistake to suppose that the pioneer families were gloomy or fearful at thought of the dangers of their long voyage. On the contrary, except when they were in immediate peril, they were remarkably gay and hopeful, perhaps a little reckless. During the 4 months they were on their way, the immigrants beguiled the time with songs and tales and jests, besides many a dance on deck. Colonel Donaldson's handsome daughter Rachel, who afterwards married the renowned Andrew Jackson, was said to have had, above the rest, a light foot in the dance. Rachel Donaldson had been elsewhere described as a young woman with that magnetic personality that sways and controls hearts, and whose sparkling black eyes were the admiration of all. Diversion was otherwise found in providing game for the table. The men would often stop to fish or shoot along the banks. Among various exploits of the kind, a member of the party shot a swan on the Cumberland, which was delicious. Wow, very Victorian of them. According to the record of a swan, I wonder what a swan was doing out there. Let's see. According to the record of the Colonel Donaldson in the journal which he kept of the events of the voyage, this is an interesting entry showing that there were feathered creatures found by the early settlers now unknown in Tennessee. Still earlier travelers in the eastern part of the state have written of parakeets and other semi-tropical birds seen in the forests. It's got to be people bring them over. Though the voyagers were as a rule, buoyant and carefree, the journey was not made without danger, suffering, and loss. One boat's crew, which became infected with smallpox, yikes, was necessarily allowed to drop behind and perished at the hands of the Indians. John Cotton's boat was capsized in the Narrows of the Tennessee, and the swirling waters called the Boiling Pot. I've been there. That's in the Smoky Mountains. Mr. Gallagher's boat was fired on from the heights on both sides of the Narrows. It was then that his daughter Nancy distinguished herself for courage and presence of mind. While the men were dazed with alarm, she took the helm and steered the boat to safety, although she had been wounded by a bullet. As she uttered no groan or word of complaint, it was not suspected by those she saved that she was hurt until all danger was over, and it was found that she had been shot through the thigh. Ouch. The party who went in advance by land reached their destination long before Donaldson's fleet arrived. On the cold Christmas day of 1779, they found themselves... Well, that's a good day to land. They found themselves on the eastern bank of the frozen Cumberland and crossed on ice to the bluffs. On May 24, 1780, So they arrived on Christmas, but the others arrived May 24th. Wow, that's a difference. The travelers by boat reached the same point on the river. They were rejoiced on landing to see that a number of snug log cabins had been built for them by Robinson and his companions. Otherwise, the prospect was rather dreary. Cane, brakes, cedars, and unbroken woods only were to be seen anywhere except in the small space above the spring, which the men had planted in corn. The light-hearted people made the best of their situation. They neatly arranged in their cabins a few articles of furniture they had brought, and turned their cattle out to graze with bells on their necks and hobbles on their feet until fences could be built to keep them from straying too far. The pioneers were then ready to cultivate the fields which had been planted by the first comers. They worked hard and looked forward cheerfully to the time when the grain should be harvested. The biggest hopes of the new settlers See you later, honey. Annie's out. Were later realized. In the end, their dreams of peace and plenty were fulfilled. But there was a period of 14 years of danger from Indians and even a short time of distress for food ahead of them in their new home before they fully reaped the reward of their courage and patient endurance of hardships. It is true that Okanastota's warriors on the east no longer disturbed them, and their nearest red neighbor on the west, the peaceful Paimingo, the mountain leader, who was chief of the Chickasaws, boasted that he had never shed a white man's blood in anger, yet they had dangerous enemies of the Chickamaugas, the same tribe near Lookout Mountain, who had attacked their boats in the Narrows of the Tennessee. There and the almost equally fierce Creeks from Alabama often came by way of a trail known to themselves. So Alabama is south of Tennessee. To threaten the settlers of the Cumberland. Added to harassment from the savages, the pioneers during their second winter at the Bluffs had also to contend with scarcity of food. The cold winter 1779 to 80 had killed so many of the creatures of the woods that there was but little meat to eat. And as the river that year overflowed the Sulphur Spring bottom in June and swept away the settlers' first crop of corn, oh no, when it was knee-high, too late to replant, the people suffered equally for lack of bread. The price of the grain rose to $1.60 a bushel and could only be procured at all by sending occasional pack horses for it to Kentucky. Meal was so scarce that it was cooked in small quantities only for the aged, the sick, or the very young. Exceptions to the rule were rare occasions, such as wedding feasts, at which the bride's cake was a large loaf or pone of egg bread, or the arrival of strangers, before whom was invariably set the best food that could be had. Newcomers were welcome in every home, and there was no bill to pay when they left. It was the custom to give merrymakings in their honor, usually in the front yard, which was swept and strewn with wild flowers for the festival. Manufactured articles were, of course, rare on the frontiers. The only ink in use was made as needed from gunpowder. Wow. Horse collars of corn shucks and traces of rawhide were common. Seats were often only handmade stools, round or square. Gourds of all shapes and sizes, up to the Punger gourd, which held 4 or 5 gallons, were used for storing salt, soap, lard, and other supplies. Not a few families ate their meals with pieces of sharpened cane instead of forks, and all beat corn into meal by hand, there being no grist mills in the country. The only sugar in use was made from the boiled sap of maple trees. As the population of the settlement of the Cumberland increased, some began to grow tired of the hardships that they had to endure and the dangers they had to encounter in pioneer life. In their discontent, they openly declared that they were sorry they had ever come into the wilderness. Well, no one said it was going to be easy. At last, when affairs grew desperate, the malcontents publicly proposed that they should all abandon the place and move away in a body. They were for going at once. Others were for staying, and still others, frankly, said they would be guided in the matter by the advice of James Robertson, who had not yet spoken his view on the subject. He knew the difficulties and perils. He had weighed the matter well, and being urged, he called the men to meet in council and said to them, I do not deny the great danger we are in, both from starvation and from savages. Whether we go on, whether we stay, we may all be destroyed either here in our homes or on our way back through Kentucky. Yet you all, each one of you, must decide for yourselves. As for me and mine, we will stay. So Nashville's up here, and Kentucky is right above us, and then Virginia is above us, but further east. So they would be going kitty corner back. Only few of the men decided to leave. The remainder, encouraged by his steadfast example, said they would stand by their leader and share his fate. From that time, they gave up thought of seeking ease in older communities and went earnestly to work to make their own situation what they desired it to be. By hard labor and brave resistance, they laid the foundation of Middle Tennessee with the rifle and the axe. By their courage and fortitude, Robertson's journey by land was turned to good account, and as a result of their determination, the voyage of the Good Boat Adventure was saved from being a futile enterprise. I hope you enjoyed that story, and we'll see you for the next one.